do, and I never take it for granted or take it lightly when we get threats. But it was nothing like what Thurgood Marshall would get. I mean, when he would say he's coming to town to take a case, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, everybody would say, all the black people get happy. Thurgood's coming. Thurgood's coming. But all the white supremacist groups in the KKK and them, they knew he was coming too.
Exactly.
And he came anyway, even though he knew they were all trying to get the high yellow Negro from New York. They were trying to kill him. And he would literally have to move from house to house every night because they knew the lynch mob was coming.
Exactly.
And every morning he would show up to court. It was sort of a miracle that they didn't get him.
Right.
And they almost got him a couple of times when you read about his history. But he would compartmentalize, and I have found that I do that too, because he said he would have to stay focused on the mission. Other than that, there would be more injustices happen. And so when I'm sitting with Breonna Taylor's mother and little sister, or both of Jean's family, you're trying to keep it together and keep focused, because they've just had one of the most devastating losses that any parent, any sibling can ever imagine. And so you're trying to stay focused and trying to help them make sense out of something that makes no sense at all.
Yes.
But you can't lose your focus, because they're depending on you to be a level of some kind of foundation, some level of some stability to try to move towards justice. And so I find myself compartmentalizing, trying to not think about all the death and the despair and the tragedy, but just trying to say we are going to try to get some sense of justice, so that life is not in vain. But what I did notice from Nadia Hargren, the incredible director who directed Silver, the Netflix documentary, she also directed Michelle Obama's documentary, Becoming, a very talented young Afro Puerto Rican sister. She would get those, she would get those subtle moments, those vulnerable moments that I didn't even realize. So often after I met with the families, she would get video of me like rubbing my forehead and rubbing my temples and stuff. And as I watched the documentary, it kind of occurred to me that was my physical manifestation of that mental anguish that I had internalized looking at Breonna's body with all those bullet holes, with her being exposed in the hallway. And if you saw the documentary, how they lied to her mother and sent her mother to the hospital, even though they knew that she was dead in that apartment hallway the whole time, and just how you're trying to help Breonna's mother deal with that. You have to keep it together for them. But I have started, even though it's my telemedicine, because I ain't got no time. Time is always my enemy. I have started once a month, at least for a session, talking to a mental health counselor, my fraternity brother, about just trying to internalize what happened the last month since we talked. And now I'm gonna tell about Eric Cantel, and I looked at that little boy with all those wires on him in the hospital, and just trying to advise his mother and father. I digress, and I said the answer was gonna be shorter, but man, the hospital have their lawyers when they're talking about whether to pull the plug or not, and they meet with the family and they meet with the parents, and they're telling them that it's really, he has no sensation of life. He's being kept alive by a breathing machine, and every time we take him off the machine, he starts to go into cardiac arrest, and then we put him back on, And so it's more humane to just pull the plug. And how, for a mother or a father, you say, but no, I don't want to give up on my child.
Yes.
And just that mental anguish. So I'm trying to figure out when I fly back to San Antonio, what do I tell them? Because unfortunately hospitals are like, this is too much money for us to keep on life support. So we want y'all to make the decision versus us having to go take court action and all this stuff. And it's just a terrible situation, all because he was profiled because of the color of his skin. And then quickly just, why I keep doing it every day? Yeah, it's because when I was a first year law student, they taught us about precedent. And they would tell us everything has to be based on precedent. They said, you can't be coming up with things on your own. You got to base it on precedent and the precedent that have been set in the past, because we want the laws to have reason based on precedent to be consistent with the laws that are going to be ruled on today and the laws that will be decided tomorrow. We want to have precedent. They kept saying that over and over again, indoctrinating it in our mind. Now, I didn't believe it because there's a black person who had just a civil rights kindred spirit. I said, but hold on, if we base everything on precedent, then I'll still be a slave. Because the precedent in the United States of America by the Supreme Court was that slavery was legal. But I understood what they were trying to teach us, that based on precedent, it's a likely indicator for what is to happen in the future. And so I knew based on the precedent of black people in America that we overcame being defined as 3/5 of a human being at the founding of this country. And we overcame that. I knew based on precedent of black people in America that we overcame the Dred Scott decision, where the Supreme Court said that there were no rights that a black person had that a white person was bound to respect.
Exactly.
And we overcame that. I knew based on the precedent of black people in America, we overcame one of the most horrific genocidal dynamics ever to exist in the course of human history with the Middle Passage, where more than 3/4 of the people died on the voyage from Africa to America, being packed on one another in chains. I mean, administrating on people, defecating on people, vomiting on people. I mean, and we overcame that. And I think about the precedent of how we overcame Reconstruction and the carpetbaggers after the Civil War, and how we overcame that, how we overcame Plessy v. Ferguson, separate but equal when there was nothing equal about it, how black people in America based on precedents overcame Jim Crow, and more importantly, how we overcame Jim Crow Jr., PhD Esquire today. And we overcome that. And so what it tells me is that no matter what the enemies of equality throw at us, we're going to be all right. We're going to overcome it.
Preach.
And that's what gives me hope. Every day, no matter what they do, we going to overcome it based on the precedent of what our ancestors have overcome. And that keeps me going. That keeps me going. And I think about our children. Our children are so worth the fight. When you look at our children, just look at, I look at my 9-year-old daughter, and I look at the hope and the optimism in their eyes. And you say, man, if they're not worth fighting for, then who is worth fighting for? Right. And so no matter what happens, no matter how many times they might break our heart, I know we will win this war. The enemies of equality will not win. And that keeps me going.
Preach. Amen.
And that gives me hope as well. Thank you. I will admit I've selected this question. There's some wonderful questions here, slightly out of some personal interest as a state lawmaker. I'm going to draw on your expertise, and hopefully you don't send me a bill because I don't think I can afford you. But
Pro bono.
thank you. So this is important in every state right now, and like I said, as a state lawmaker, I'm interested to see how this will manifest in the coming months. With the recent Biden administration's announcement on decriminalizing marijuana-related convictions, and given our vast understanding of how racially discriminatory our criminal justice system is, and people of color, especially Black men, suffering under the burdens of those convictions, how do we, as a state government, do we move forward in righting those wrongs, given our own governor's recent statement that it's not the place of the state legislature or the government? I hope that question's clear. It's a little long-winded, I apologize.
No, it's a very good question, and thank you for your leadership, first of all. Please give her a round of applause. We have to have true leaders willing to follow the conscience of their conviction, the conviction of their conscience. And I think about, just a little, I wrote the book, Legalize Genocide of Colored People, and we talked about how this war on drugs, it was never a war on drugs, it was a war on poor people of color. That's what it was always about.
Amen.
When you go back to the history of marijuana, as I write in my book, don't take my word for it, go research, just Google the history of criminalization of marijuana in the late 1920s and the 1930s, where they said that, Mexican people came to America and, they looked different and they talked different, and, a lot of white people didn't really like it, ignorance is bliss. And so they what things can we do to keep them away from us or stop them from coming? And they noticed they had this ritual about marijuana, as they called it. It was spiritual for them and so forth. And they would say, okay, well, that's something that we can proscribe. And when we do that, we can either put them in jail or send them back to Mexico. And so you had local people starting to pass laws to say that marijuana is illegal. And then that evolved to state law. And then finally, it made it to federal government in the mid-1930s. And it's all there in black and white. They had a debate on the floor of the United States Congress. And you know what the winning argument was for getting marijuana to be illegal in the United States of America? I see some people nodding their heads, so y'all heard it before. The winning argument was that if we don't make it illegal for people to smoke marijuana, then white women will smoke it and want to sleep with black men. That was the winning argument. And that's how marijuana became illegal in America. And think about how many people, especially black and brown people, have went to prison. Lives have been stolen from them for selling marijuana. And I have to make this argument because this is an argument to make just on the common sense of it. The fact that when you have little black and brown people selling marijuana to make money, to pay their bills, we all said that it was illegal and we locked them up and we threw away the key. I just remember so much. All the prosecutors being tough on crime. They poisoned in the community. We got to lock them up and we got to throw away the key and so forth. And I think about Flint, Michigan, where I represent thousands of young children whose brain development was stunted because government officials made a decision to use the water from the Flint River to save a few pennies because the minority community really wasn't that important, or they were insignificant to us. And so let's give them poison water, and we all knew it was filled with lead. And they actually poisoned the community. And how many people went to jail for people actually poisoning the community? 0. So, I mean, you had all these black and brown people going to prison for 10, 20, 30 years, some life in prison for selling marijuana. And they said the reason we did it because we got to be hard on crime because they poisoned the community. And when we really came to people who actually poisoned the community, nobody went to jail. That's how you know it was a hoax. It was never about sending people to jail for poisoning the community. It was about criminalization of poor black and brown people. And now that we have legalized marijuana in most states in America, it's legalized where mostly rich white men are going to make billions and billions of dollars for selling marijuana, and the government is going to sell marijuana to make money, to pay their bills. It's okay now. But it was wrong when black and brown people were doing it. So I say objection. Objection, America. No governmental entity should be able to profit from selling marijuana to pay their bills until they let all the black people and all the brown people and anybody else sitting in prison for selling marijuana.
Amen. Preach. Preach.
You cannot justify.
Preach.
You cannot justify. And so I say we got to have the conviction to say that this whole thing about marijuana and having people continue to languish in prison is just discrimination.
Amen.
Marginalized people.
Amen.
It is what it is.
Preach.
Thank you, and I agree, and I'm anxious to look at what we in the state of Utah can be doing to make sure that those policies come down to the state level. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you, because I know it's going to be a
It's going to take everybody in here, so y'all get ready.
Amen.
This one I'm going to read directly instead of trying to paraphrase, and I think you'll understand why when I read it. What would your advice be to a black woman going into healthcare, particularly health administration, to make sure racism and inequities in a system that is robust and difficult to manage at times?
You know, first of all, I would thank you for having the courage to go try to make a difference. You know, it's so easy. It is so easy to take the path of least resistance.
Thank you. Thank you.
People do it every day.
All the time.
I mean, and the true hero, the true person to be applauded is the person to say, no, I'm going to take a stand because my conscience says
Thank you.
we can be better
Preach.
than this.
Preach.
We can do better.
Preach.
And it's not always going to be easy. But the advice I would give to you is try as best you can to be prepared, be strategic. Remember we were talking about strategic thinking, making sure our young lambs, marginalized people of color are well armed. You gotta know that you're gonna get resistance when you start trying to really make a difference.
Exactly.
To really help people.
Preach.
And so you wanna be prepared to document.
Yes.
You wanna be prepared to have data.
Yes.
You wanna be prepared to form strategic alliances with others so you're not, when you ultimately make the arguments, you're not alone. That you have already played the next chess moves out in your mind because it's a game of chess, not checkers.
Right.
And so that's how you win this war. I always say that the only way we will win this war, and I believe this with everything in my heart, the only way we will win this war is we have to make sure that our children are more intelligent
Yes.
than those who will seek to
Yes.
oppress them.
Preach, preach.
That's it.
Preach.
You gotta make sure our young children
Yes.
are ready.
Yes, yes.
And so hopefully that young woman thinking about going into healthcare, just get ready. And the reward will be so fulfilling, because I do believe when you do good, you can do well. You don't have to take a vow of poverty just because you're trying to help underserved people. There are all manner of things that can help you prosper. I know just writing articles. In court, man, I get so tired of the powers that be that write all these essays and articles and peer review and law reviews for the police to justify killing black and brown people.
Thank you.
I be saying, man, I hope there's some universities, and that's why I'm so happy about St. Thomas doing the public policy. Universities that will have young people just start writing papers, because then we will pay you to come and be expert witnesses.
Yes.
We'll pay you a lot of money just to be able to counteract or contradict some of this BS that they keep saying.
Preach.
You know,
Preach.
and so go and be strategic about it. Use your intellect, because it's power in intellect.
Thank you. So we have several questions that pivot to university training, college level training, health education, and also university level policy making on what we as health professionals can and should be doing to improve not just health equity or equities and health outcomes for marginalized communities, but the building of a better workforce to address the cultural needs of the marginalized communities in our state.
You know, what I always say when people start talking about how we deal with being more diverse, well, if you're truly sincere about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you have to be intentional about having different people at the table. Because if you just got white men at the table,
Thank you.
you're gonna get a white man's perspective.
Thank you.
Ain't no way around it.
Mhm.
And until you include a native man, a brother, or a Hispanic sister, or a black woman,
Yes.
you're not gonna get different perspectives, because they have different life experiences.
Cross-pollinate.
They have different cultural values and so forth. And I remember Reverend Jesse Jackson would always say that, you know, they used to argue before Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball. They said, well, if we let black people and Hispanic people come into Major League Baseball, it will bring down the quality of the game. And what Jesse Jackson said was, we did not know how good baseball could be until we let everybody play the game. You know, we don't know how great we can be until we get everybody at the table, because, I mean, diversity of not just race, but diversity of age, diversity of education. I learned some of my best things from my clients, and they don't have these fancy law degrees and, you know, PhDs and stuff. My grandmother, we called her my Mitty Cardell, had an 8th grade education, and she still, to this day, is the wisest person I've ever met on the face of this earth. And I've met all kind of highly educated people from great educational institutions like the University of Utah and, you know, Harvard and everything. I put my grandma against all of them. I mean, because you can learn something from everybody if you give them a chance to sit at the table. And that makes me have to say this here. My mother would always say, baby, life ain't fair. Life is hard. You make it fair by what you bring to the table. And if you don't bring that to the table, don't expect nobody to let you sit down at the table. And she would tell us that education was something to bring to the table. And I remember Dr. Lopez, and she said, when you get to the table, you try to help other people from our community get to the table. But I remember when I graduated from college at Florida State University, Tom. And my grandmother and all my big, beautiful black family was there because it was a big deal to have somebody graduate with a college degree. The first thing I said to my mama was, I'm bringing something to the table. And that's what we have to continue to do, try to get people at the table. And don't make excuses.
Thank you.
Don't make excuses.
Thank
Man, I'm suing a lot of corporations right now for discrimination. And Butch Graves, who is the editor and CEO of Black Enterprise Magazine, he told me, he said, Ben, he said, ask for their KTN report, or something I believe it's called, where you have to list, if you're a publicly traded company, the top 5 employees of your company. And he said, ask to see that every case you take, and hopefully this, y'all understand why this applies to your question. And he said, most of the time, it's gonna be white man. Every now and then you may have a white woman as the highest ranking people in your corporation. And you're up here saying, I'm committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. He said, but don't worry about that. He said, go to the top 100. Ask, who are your top 100 people in your corporation?
Yeah.
He said, I doubt you'll see a person of color in the top 100.
Preach.
He said, don't fall for the okie doke that with the titles and stuff saying we got. No, ask what their salaries are. Ask what their incomes are.
Preach.
He said, because we all learn from our mothers and fathers, we get to know your values based on looking at your budget. We know about what's important to you, where you spend your money. So he would say, ask to see the top 100 employees and what they make, subpoena that information. And most times you ain't gonna see white men, okay, you see white women. And he said, go to 300. He said, because when you are looking at companies like Amazon and Google and Walmart and them, you won't see a black person in the top 300 people based on salaries. And he said, that's how you know if they're really committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because if they gonna pay people in the top 25, then they're gonna let them sit at the table, because they ain't gonna say, we paying you $2-3 million and we ain't gonna have you at the table. But oftentimes, the people who are making decisions won't be diverse.
Correct.
And you can see that
Correct.
by just looking at
The
the
outcomes.
index of the salaries of corporate America. And so when we talk about how to increase diversity in healthcare professions and health education, do what Bush told me. Just say, well, let's see who the top people in the company are, in the organization, or in the department. And if you ain't got diversity, not just on paper, but what you paying them, you know it ain't sincere.
Amen.
Thank you. Mr. Crump, as health professionals, how can we better engage with the legal community and law enforcement to start to find ways to break down the disparities in health equity in our communities? Yeah,
And I answered this before. We will beg you, just start writing articles. Like, think about the prison population, yeah? Just get the raw data and everything. Say, hey, you know, America's made up of 68% white people.
Yep.
Right now. In most states, the numbers are greater than that. I would imagine Utah may have 70% white and 30% other.
And 14%
87% white, and then about 13%, 23% other. And so you scratch your head and you say, man,
But who's going to prison?
why we got 50% of our incarcerated people,
Thank you. Preach.
people of color,
Preach. Preach.
are
Preach.
60%, sometimes 70% in many states. How do we start writing about those things and the mental effect it has on the family?
Generational trauma.
Yeah, the generational trauma. Amen, sister. Because if you just start writing about those things, give us some peer review stuff to be able to push back when we're in court fighting against the injustices, and say you got to give more funding to marginalized, disadvantaged communities or departments of health. You got to give more resources to deal with the generational trauma of the community and all this stuff. And we can see, because you say, well, they didn't have a father and mother in there, because you keep putting them in prison and so forth. I tell y'all this, and man, it's kind of deep when I say this, and I say it a lot when I speak at colleges and corporations, because they invite me to speak at Dr. Lopez. I'm like, I'm up now. Y'all invited me. I ain't asked to come, so I'm going to speak truth to power.
That's right. You speak it, brother. Speak it.
And
Preach
so,
it.
in places like my home state of Florida and Tennessee and Texas, in most states in America, one out of every 5 black men in America are a convicted felon. Think about that. 1 out of every 5 black men are convicted felons in most states in America. And they say if this trend continues in the next 25 years, 1 out of every 3 black men in the United States of America will be a convicted felon. So I want you all to indulge me for a minute.
It's already there in New Jersey.
Imagine
Yes, it's lynching.
you are
That's what it is.
a black parent
Amen.
and you have a black male child,
Preach.
and you have a black male nephew,
Preach.
and you have a black male cousin. And I want you to imagine in your mind's eye that your black child and your black cousin and nephew are about the age of 5, 6, 7 years old. And in your mind's eye, imagine them at play as most children are. And I want you to observe them in your mind's eye for a few minutes while they're playing, and try to imagine which one of those 3 little boys in the next 10 to 15 years are going to be labeled a convicted felon as having no redeeming qualities to offer society and to have to be a leper
Prosperity.
in society.
Yes.
You try to figure out which one of those 3 little boys with your blood running through their veins is going to end up a convicted felon. Because with black people, it doesn't matter how educated you are, what the index of your salary, where you live at, your area code. The statistics are bearing out. Right now, it's 1 out of every 5 black men, and if the trend continues, in 25 years, it'll be 1 out of every 3 black men. And so that's going to be our children.
Social determinants.
And so our white brothers and sisters can't even fathom that their child is going to end up likely to be a convicted felon. Every time you type their name in the computer,
Yes.
people get repulsed
Yes.
because they say they're convicted felons of some trumped up crime. It could be anything. I mean, I know when I was at Tallahassee at Florida A&M town, a young black college student got in an argument with his girlfriend. Our former state attorney, Willie Meggs, he would charge them with burglary of an occupied dwelling where the victim was assaulted or battered. Just where they had an argument and the police was called. And now you got a young black man that was going to get a college degree. Now you have transformed that to now it's going to be a young black man with a convicted felon. Because they target our black young men. And it was as easy as that. And you think about that same situation, a young white man arguing with his young white girlfriend. They called the police. Slap on the wrist, oh, they'll be okay. It was just a little argument. where they don't treat black people and brown people the same.
Preach.
And so that's what we're dealing with. Right about those things, those dynamics of the mental trauma for just a black person going to court. You know, the talcum powder litigation where all the women got ovarian cancer for using baby powder
Yes.
because Johnson & Johnson,
Yes.
this corporate entity, was just evil. In the mid-1990s, they found out that there was a causal connection between talcum, use of talcum powder, and ovarian cancer. And when the New York Times then wrote about it, they noticed, they observed a major drop-off with white women not using baby powder anymore. But then they studied their research and saw there was no drop-off from black women and Hispanic women. So what did they do? They doubled their marketing efforts to black and brown communities to use talcum powder. But even with that, we know disproportionately black and brown women have ovarian cancer from using this talcum powder, but we can't get them to come forward to become part of the mass tort litigation, even though they can recover hundreds of thousands of dollars, because black and brown people don't trust courts.
Thank you.
Nothing good happens for us when we go to court.
Right. Amen.
I mean, think about it. You go to court, somebody's going to jail, somebody been killed, you know, I mean, just negative things.
Yes.
And so they're like, yeah, I'm not gonna let myself believe again. America, I use the example, and give me your name once more.
Jennifer.
Jennifer, your last name?
Daily Pro, I have 2 last names.
Okay, David.
JDP.
Representative Jennifer, JDP. Oh, that's kind of cool. Now, JDP, I was going to just make the point. When I think about the criminal justice system, and I was doing a CNN interview, and I was trying to explain it to them about, you know, the lack of accountability and justice when the police kill us unjustly. It's like America keeps saying, we're gonna be equal justice under the law. You can believe us this time. No, really, we believe it. It didn't happen for Trayvon. It didn't happen for Michael Brown. It didn't happen for Stephon Clark. It didn't happen for Sandra Bland. It didn't happen for Eric Gardner. It didn't happen for Ezell Ford. It didn't happen for Atiana Jefferson. It didn't happen for Terrence Crutcher. It didn't happen for Stephon Clark. You know, it didn't happen for none of them. But believe us this time, we really gonna be fair. We gonna be equal. We gonna give justice equally, because it's equal justice under the law, liberty and justice for all. And I say it's akin to Lucy and Charlie Brown and holding the football. You know, Lucy say, no, Charlie Brown, really this time, I'm not gonna move the ball away. You can trust me this time. I'm really gonna do it. No, Charlie Brown, I wouldn't do it again. You think I'd do it? I just told all these people, I'm not gonna move the football and so forth. And then finally, like Charlie Brown, black people, we kind of let down our guard and we say, okay, we gonna believe America this time. And then we run up there and we gonna kick the football, and I'll be damned. Lucy, move the football again. And you see Pam Turner again. You know, Breonna Taylor, if you watch the documentary Civil, you know, it's a Netflix, and Kenya Barris, who created Blackish, they devoted a lot of time. They followed me for a year and a half, unbeknownst that unbeknownst that Ahmaud Arbery was going to happen, that George Floyd, that Breonna Taylor was going to happen. And we got to see, you know, we got justice for Ahmaud, we got justice for George Floyd, and so forth, but they had announced the charges for Breonna. And remember, Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General for Kentucky, in fact, he announced, and they captured in the movie because it was all in real time, and throughout the documentary, some of you who saw it, nodding heads, I always talk to my mom, like every day. My mom, she, you know, mothers are the same no matter what. My mom would see me on the news, she'll call me, JDP, she's like, baby, you on the news today. And I'm like, yeah, Mom, I know, I kind of did the interview, but and so I would talk to Mom every day, and man, that scene I remember most, because you remember, it's just human nature. You remember the bad, or you sometimes pay attention to the bad more than you pay attention to the good, and I have to work on that. But I remember after they came out and said no charges would be filed against the police officers for killing Breonna Taylor, my mother called me, and if you haven't watched the documentary, you'll see that part. My mother said, Lord, oh Lord, no justice for Breonna. She said, Kentucky gonna burn tonight. And I said, no, Mama, we gotta pray that don't happen, because that would just give them a reason to hurt more of us.
Mm-hmm.
But she said, it's just, when will we get justice for us, our people? And that was one of the things that was so vivid to me, because my mother, she just, Lord, my Lord, no justice for Breonna. Again, no justice for black women. And so, how many times when they removed the football? You can't tell me. Nobody can tell me. Nobody can convince me. If Breonna Taylor was a young white woman, that those officers wouldn't have been charged and put under the jail.
Preach.
Because they just don't seem to value black life, and they really don't value black women's lives.
Preach.
And I went off on a tangent, but I just thought y'all needed to hear it.
Preach.
And at this point, I really hate to be the bearer of bad news, because we sadly have run out of time for today, but I want to take this, the honor of this opportunity to thank you again for being here. Our experience, our understanding, our day is deeply enriched by having you, and we know how incredibly busy you are, and are so grateful that you were willing to come and join us in Salt Lake City today, and help us get a better grasp on the problems, and come together to find ways to work together to solve these problems. Thank you,
Amen.
I will say this.